Hello everyone and welcome to the very first political video of this channel. For this video we're going to be talking about the future of Canada. So to start off, I made a sort of mind compass that was inspired by this one video that I saw online a few days ago, where that was mainly a joke video about Canada. This one's going to be a little bit more serious, and it's going to start off with the Canadian election that's going to happen in April 28th, I believe. So the further up a picture is, the better the ending for Canada is, and then the lower the picture is, the worse the ending is for Canada. So to start off with the mind compass, we've got the two candidates that have the most chance of winning, which is Pierre Poilievre and Mark Carney. At the time of this recording, Mark Carney is leading in the polls. However, those are very inaccurate and don't tell the full story usually in cases like this. I believe in the USA election, it predicted that Kamala Harris would win that election, which we all know is not the case, which is also a main factor in why I'm making this video, because this election is the most important one in Canadian history and will determine the future course of Canada. So to start off, we're gonna go with Pierre Poilievre winning, and then there's three directions that Canada can go from here. The first one is the bad direction, where tensions continue to rise between Canada and the USA, which I believe is the most likely course of action, because Trump seems to really want us to become the 51st state, quote unquote, which I don't know where that came from, but I guess we're in this boat now. So this is what I think is going to be the most likely scenario. From there, there's the possibility of war between Canada and the USA, which I don't think is really likely for obvious reasons, but it still could technically be a possibility, though. It would be extremely hard for Trump to get the support of his military. Obviously, there'd be so much backlash on the USA, and you go into war with Canada. If you do that, you're just kind of the bad guy. And then, obviously, if the USA and Canada went to war, obviously the USA would win, and then it'd lead to full annexation. So this obviously is the most unlikely scenario out of all of them. I don't think Trump's gonna invade Canada. I don't think he's that far gone, but it's still technically a possibility, so I just want to lay that out there. And next up, we got relations between Canada and the USA improving. Maybe if Pierre Poilievre gets elected, Trump would see more of a benefit of working with Canada versus opposing Canada, which is also a decently likely scenario. It all depends on how much Trump really wants Canada to become part of the USA. So obviously, relations improving between Canada and the USA is just better for everyone. That's like the best case scenario for Canada in my book, though personally, I think it's more likely that relations are going to sour between the USA and Canada, because I feel like Trump just really wants Canada that bad. And then next up, we got the best case scenario for Canada, which is Canada basically becomes the new leader of the free world. Our new Prime Minister Mark Carney was talking about that, and it seems like Europe and I guess the world as a whole is looking at Canada as like the leader of the resistance against the USA and Trump. So it makes sense that this sort of situation is now happening, which I never thought would happen. Canada being the leader of the free world, which is technically putting us on course to become a superpower, assuming we get a higher population and a higher military and blah 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 blah. We're not actually going to become a superpower just because we have the USA's sphere of influence in our hands, but still pretty cool scenario. And I think that would happen if Pierre Poilievre gets put in charge of Canada. It's already starting to happen now under Mark Carney, so it would make sense that this trend continues on unless if relations improve between the USA and Canada. And then from there, even better would be Canada forming a united coalition against the USA, so that way they become completely isolated, which is already starting to kind of happen, though I don't think they can get the full world on board with it, because the USA seems to be allying with Russia, and then I'm sure there's gonna be a bunch of neutral nations who Trump won't really go after as much, that wouldn't want to formally oppose the USA to that extent. I could see many more more countries outside of the USA's now former sphere of influence getting involved in that. So it's still a possibility, though definitely not the entire world like this photo is misleading to. And then here we got the best ending, which would be Pierre Poilievre is able to unite Britain, Canada, Australia, and New Zealand into a Kanzuk Union, which is, it's been floated around more. It's always been like a smaller movement that's been popular within all the Kanzuk countries, but now, especially with Trump opposed in Canada, it's starting to pick up more steam again. But I haven't seen Pierre Poilievre or Mark Carney talk about anything regarding a Kanzuk Union, so this is pretty unlikely. That, and also Australia, New Zealand, Britain, they're all corrupt countries similar to Canada, and their situation doesn't seem to be improving any more than Canada's will. Though Pierre Poilievre seems to be very against the corruption that the Liberal Party has committed during their 3 terms, so it's going to be very interesting seeing what gets released. Canadians, we all like hear about stuff that has happened over the course of the Liberals' terms, though we don't actually know the full extent of what's going on behind the scenes. So that's going to really shake up the country if that information ever gets released. So that's what will happen if Pierre Poilievre will win. There's many different ways that Canada could take. The most likely that I predict again is that relations between the USA and Canada sour, and then we take control over the USA's former sphere of influence, becoming the new leader of the free world, and to an extent we unite a lot of the countries against the USA to oppose them. I doubt that this is going to happen anytime soon, a Kanzuk Union, and I doubt that the USA and Canada will go to war. But hey, you never know. I'm just throwing those possibilities out there. So next up, we have if Mark Carney wins the election. So right now, Mark Carney is leading in the polls, which I expected would happen after Trudeau formally resigned as Prime Minister, though I did not expect that he'd actually overtake Pierre Poilievre to that extent in the polls, to the point where Pierre Poilievre had like 80% of Canada wanting to have him in power, and then 20% of Canada wanted the Liberals in power. And now that Mark Carney has taken charge of Canada, that has switched to now 80% of Canada wanting the Liberals to continue ruling over Canada, and 20% of Canada wanting the Conservatives to rule over Canada, which I don't believe that's true. I know many Canadians, and I have not seen any Canadians who switch from wanting to support Pierre Poilievre to Mark Carney simply because he got in. So the polls are definitely skewed. I know so many people who want to vote for Pierre Poilievre, but then again, I work in the trade, so there's that bias. But still, Canadians definitely aren't that dumb to blindly trust this random person. No offense to Mark Carney for coming in when Pierre Poilievre, he's been around for a while. Canadians know who Pierre Poilievre is much more than Mark Carney. News slowly about his past is starting to come up, so I'm really curious on how that's gonna go down. I hear he's been involved in the Epstein Island stuff. He's been taking Canadian business away from Canada to the USA and other countries. Apparently he owns like a giant oil company, something like that. So yeah, he's just against liberal values as a whole, so I don't even see why most liberals would even want to vote for him. Ironically enough, Pierre Poilievre is more of a liberal than Mark Carney. Anyways, that's my 2 cents on that. So moving on to what if Mark Carney does win. Obviously, immediately, relations would continue to sour between Canada and the USA. Trump wants Mark Carney to win the election because that would make Canada weaker, and he'll be able to negotiate the partition of Canada much more. So definitely relations between Canada and the USA continue to sour even more. And then this is a real possibility that Alberta secedes from Canada. There's been polls coming out in the summer between 30% of Albertans and 40% of Albertans want to secede from Canada. And there's actually some surveys where more Saskatchewans want to secede from Canada than Albertans. But yeah, I could definitely see Alberta, maybe even Alberta and Saskatchewan seceding from Canada at the same time, because if Mark Carney wins, Alberta and Saskatchewan, they're mainly conservatives, and if the Liberals win a 4th term, they're obviously just gonna say screw it, we want to join the USA. They'd rather Canada stay as a country, but if they get elected for a 4th term, then we're just gonna join the USA. That's basically the mindset against that. that, and that's also the mindset with most conservatives that I've met, where the conservatives, they do not want a fourth liberal term, because that would just be devastating to Canada, because they've already had 3 terms and it's just been awful for Canada. All Canadians agree Canada used to be a much more prosperous country until the Liberals took power. Liberals, they blame it on other factors. Conservatives, they blame it on Liberals. Whatever you think, that's your decision to decide, but that's just my 2 cents as a Canadian on that. So there's a real possibility that Alberta and Saskatchewan, they secede from Canada. I personally believe that will happen. Trump has been awfully quiet about it, so I wouldn't be shocked if in the election Trump actually commits election fraud to try to get Mark Carney a full majority in parliament, because Canadians' electoral system is actually, it's easily exploitable. It actually has been exploited in the past. News has come out like India's interfered, China's interfered, Russia's interfered in our past elections, so there's no reason why Trump can't do the same to try to get Mark Carney into power. I personally believe that the majority of Canada still supports Pierre Poilievre and that the polls are skewed, but that's just my opinion. So then either Alberta secedes first, Saskatchewan secedes first, or they both secede at the same time, and then after that it's basically the end of Canada. If one province leaves, then it's just all gonna fall apart, because then no one's gonna believe in the future of Canada. BC, I don't think they'd want to join the USA because they're very liberal. I think what they would try to do instead is gain independence from Canada. This is because they'd be completely cut off from the rest of Canada. There's no road going over Alberta and Saskatchewan to BC, so they'd just be completely cut off. The only way Canada would have access to it is through the Panama Canal, which is obviously unfeasible. So BC would basically have no choice but to gain independence. And then from there, maybe Manitoba and Quebec would also secede, leaving just Ontario and the Canadian territories. And since Ontario would be now cut off from the territories of Canada and they'd no longer be of any use and they'd be absolutely crippled, they'd probably strike up a deal with the USA to sell those territories. And then by the end of Trump's term, if he's expanded this much, you'll probably gain control over Greenland, though that's another topic for another time. I don't think I'm gonna discuss it, but yeah, there's a real possibility that Trump can annex Greenland. So this would all happen throughout the election, and then in the next election, the Democrats will most definitely win if Trump keeps up what he's doing. Even if he annexes all this Canadian territory, it's just gonna be insanely unpopular among the public because you're annexing your neighbor. It's just not what the Americans want to do. Most of them, there's obviously some Americans that do want to annex Canada, fair enough, but the majority of the Americans, they do not agree with what Trump is doing. That's not what he campaigned in his election for. So yeah, and then if the Democrats come into power, they'll definitely have to try to get more liberal provinces in, so BC, Manitoba, Ontario. I doubt they could get Quebec though. Quebec would be extremely hard to get because their culture is just completely different. And then once the Democrats have all the liberal provinces of Canada, it'd be basically impossible for the Republicans to gain power again because there'd be so much more American citizens who are more liberal compared to the Republicans that would be part of the USA, but there'd still be so many Republicans who'd want to gain back power because they do not like being under Democratic rule because it's just completely different than what Republican values are. So then most likely civil war. That's the worst case scenario. You can't have the two political ideologies. They're so contrasting of each other. Like even in 2020, 2021, on January 6th, they stormed the Capitol. Think about another Democrat being elected and then being under Democratic rule over the past 4 years, or even being under Democratic rule again for more years. It's just a recipe for disaster for the USA. But yeah, that's gonna do it for this video. A different style video for sure. I hope you got something out of it. Hopefully this video isn't absolutely horrible. We'll see. But yeah, for all the Canadians watching, vote wisely. If you want to join the USA, vote Mark Carney. Keep in mind that civil war, it is a real possibility, but it may not also happen. It's not a guaranteed factor. There may be a way for the new system to figure out a way to work. I don't know. That's off in the future. And if you want Canada to remain independent and become much stronger, then vote pure pour. That's my opinions. Choose wisely. I completely understand the Canadians who want to join the USA. I'm kind of on that fence too, but this is a real possibility as I've thought about it more. So I don't want this civil war possibility to have a chance of happening. But then again, there's also a possibility of war happening, but I'd say this is much less probable than this. So I personally would recommend voting for pure Poilievre simply just to not completely destabilize the USA. I don't think Canada and the USA should become one country because, again, this possibility here. So anyways, that's gonna do it for this video. Here's some upcoming videos that I'll be working on in the future. And yeah, vote wisely, Canadians, and good luck to Canada and the USA for whatever the future between our two countries hold.